Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and today I'm very excited to introduce Amy Walsh, former member of the Canadian Women's National Soccer Team, Canadian Soccer Hall of Famer. Thanks so much for taking the time and coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Alex. Great to be here.
I first want to ask you a little bit about your career, and was it always your dream as a kid to go to the Olympics and play professionally and go to a World Cup as well?
The soccer specific stuff came a little bit later, just because it wasn't on my radar. I had no idea it existed. And really playing professionally wasn't something that you could do, at least in North America, certainly not in Canada, which I'm sure we'll get to because it's 2023 and there's
Yeah.
still no women's professional league, but that's coming. But no, when I was a kid, I played all kinds of sports, and that was a big part of, I think, why I was able to become an elite soccer player was because of my upbringing. I had great support from my parents, but I'm one of five. So all of my siblings, I have three younger sisters and an older brother, all very sporty, all super competitive, and all actually very accomplished athletes in their own right. So small house, lots of people, lots of fight for space and what was yours. But also the side lawn was a great place to throw the football or kick a football, go down to the park at the end of the street and shoot some hoops. And in the wintertime, we're up at a cottage just outside of Mont Tremblant, not a fancy one, but on Bark Lake, where my family has a cottage, and we could skate on the lake and we could play shinny and we could do all sorts of stuff. So we skied as well. So we did all kinds of sports, and we were encouraged to play all kinds of sports. And it was also a time where specialization wasn't as important, which I think now is a little bit of a deterrent, I think, to the long-term development of our young athletes. But the wide world of sports on I don't know how old you are, Alex. I might be dating myself here, but
25, yeah.
okay, yeah. So I'm a full 2 decades older than you, but we didn't have cable. So we caught CBC Sports, and so you were at the mercy of whatever the programmers put on TV, or whatever big event was being shown. So we watched everything. And obviously encouraged our Canadian athletes. So I just wanted to go to the Olympics. Like, that was the dream at that point, even though I didn't really know how to tangibly sort of put that into place, what the pathway would look like. But I just always really admired Canadian athletes. And then it wasn't until our local paper put a tiny little article in like the bottom of the sports section. So I'm from St. Bruno, Quebec, which is just outside of Montreal. And two sisters from St. Bruno, Connie and Maureen Cant, were members of, I think, the 19s. It was after the 91 World Cup. Canada didn't go. It was maybe the qualifications for that tournament or the next one. And I became aware that there was a women's national soccer team, because these two sisters just so happened to be from my hometown were part of that team. And I said, well, hang on a minute. This exists. Like, there's actually a Team Canada for soccer for the women. Well, that's what I want to do. But then I think I was in high school at that point. So,
yeah, continue.
No, I was going to say, so my childhood idols, like, there were no female athletes, like, aside from maybe the athletics competitions I was watching on TV, or, other Olympians that I admired. And then so my idols were my big brother and Wayne Gretzky. So I didn't have posters on my wall of female soccer heroes or women heroes, because there just weren't any that were on my radar. So up until that point, I didn't know that playing soccer for Canada was a possibility. And then these two sisters, who happened to be from my hometown, did it. And so then, and my sister and I, ironically, my sister Cindy, we became then two other sisters from St. Bruno who played for the Canadian women's soccer team. So that was pretty cool. And my other two sisters, Sarah and Bonnie, are kick-ass players in their own right.
And what was it like to play for the national team for so long, and also play alongside your sister?
Yeah, that was pretty cool. My first cap was actually against China in Ottawa, and my parents were there because Ottawa was a short drive from Montreal, and Cindy and I shared the pitch in my first cap, and I think hers as well. And we'd both kind of come through the youth system, so we'd both done very well at the U20 level and sort of earned our spot on that World Cup team. But to be able to do it with my sister was pretty special and unforgettable. Actually, it's one of my favorite memories from my entire career.
And I want to ask you about I know you played it, I mentioned before, at the Olympics and at a World Cup, but you said
Two
how
World Cups.
two World Cups, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
I meant it as a generality, but yeah.
Okay.
Um I know that's clearly a point of pride, which it should be.
Yeah.
And I want to ask, to make the Olympics, did you feel as though at that time and in the two World Cups that you were a little bit of a hero to younger girls? Did you feel that way?
Hmm.
Was it a point of pride for you?
No, and I think, the fact that I corrected you there, I didn't take pleasure in correcting you, but it is a source of pride for me now, but only because I retired in 2010 and I played my last game in 2009. I think now I appreciate it with some perspective, that it was a significant accomplishment, that my career in itself and those two World Cups and the Olympics and the moments that were struggles and were tougher times for me in my career, I think really are things now that I emphasize when I speak to young teams or young girls or younger athletes that might be seeking me out for guidance. And I wish that I'd celebrated those moments more. Of course I did in the moment, when you're like on the field or it's just happened, or you're at the Olympics and you're in the opening ceremonies, the closing ceremonies. Of course you're in the moment, you're living in the moment, you're celebrating those. But I wish that I would have, without being kind of cocky and being a show off, I wish I had taken more pride in maybe being more demonstrative of not necessarily my accomplishments, but playing for Canada should have been more of a source of pride than it was during my career. And I wish now, and I think that it's probably my personality. It's probably growing up in a big family where, I probably would have taken a punch or a kick to the shins if I'd gotten too big for my britches, so they kept me in check. But there's a balance, right? You can strike a balance with not walking around with your chest puffed out and saying it's all about you. But I deliberately, I remember having moments where going to my club practice and I happened to have kit from, the Team Canada camp that I just partaken in. And then at the time, it was a big deal that we had either a shirt or a t-shirt or a tracksuit, because I know it's still talked about with our federation and how there's not enough kit to go around, and it's not really run in a professional way. And we will get to that as well. But back then it was even, it was really rare to get anything sort of tangible from those camps. And I would deliberately choose not to wear it because I didn't want to go there and somebody say, like, who do you think you are? I wanted to kind of blend in. And now that's a little bit of a regret. Maybe regret's a bit too strong a word, but I wish I'd relished those moments a little bit more, because I'm sure given the opportunity, my teammates would have said, like, we're proud of you. This is great. Like, way to go. But instead of, I think I was maybe worried about the perception of that. And I wish I would have kind of done it a little bit more, not proudly, but maybe in a more blatant way, and said, like, yeah, I am proud to do this. And I can't remember now what your original question was.
No. I want to ask you on that note, when Canada won the gold medal, and they won also bronzes as well. So, but especially the gold medal, did you feel that a part of you was in that team and kind of or even other members of the team that I'm sure you talked to, did you guys feel as alumni as part of that gold medal team that won in 2021 in Tokyo?
I felt a sense of pride as having, been part of that. And I jokingly say now, because I retired, I wish I would have had a chance to finish out that cycle, because it would have allowed me to, I think, put a bow in my career. When they won the first bronze in 2012, where Diana scored that goal in extra time against France.
We don't talk about the semifinal, but yeah.
No, we will not. It'll have to be a much longer podcast. But I realized later, like, I found my way back to the sport through broadcasting, through media, now through my involvement with CF Montreal. And I'm so happy that I did, because I really feel like it's where I need to be, where I can affect change, but where I have a really great base of knowledge. And I feel like I can really contribute to the growth of the game. But I felt kind of pushed out at the time. And even though the girls called me from the bus, like on the way back from the stadium when they won bronze, they made me feel a part of it, even though I wasn't. And maybe I was still a little bit embittered by the way that I'd left. I think them winning, and then 2016, like my twins just turned 9 this past weekend. Like I was in the throes of parenting 3 kids and no sleep, and was sort of peripheral, I think, in my support and my involvement there. But then in Tokyo was like definitely invested, and was doing some commentary for the radio here and following them. And my whole family came over, and everybody was wearing Walsh jerseys, and we watched and we screamed and we cheered, and we were nervous. But then they got to the shootout, and it was basically how Labe had conducted herself. Like I had full confidence that they were going to win. I was obviously nervous, but had full confidence that they were going to win that game. So I did feel a part of it. And then I think I mentioned it before, like I joke now when I speak to teams, I say like I laid the foundation for the medals with my career, which may or may not be true. But yeah, I did feel very much a part of that. And actually it was a few days after the fact. I have a screenshot of it, and it was Sophie and Sinky and Aaron McLeod FaceTime me. Wow. And I wasn't the only one who got a FaceTime. The 3 of them plus Stephanie made, but she wasn't on my call, but she was on others, made it a point to call like alumni, you know, people that they were connected with, people that they felt had a hand in it, even though they weren't directly involved. They weren't on the pitch. They weren't a member of the support staff, say like a Melissa Tancredi, who was actually there, or Robin, you know. So I think that link is so important. I think it's something that our federation has done a poor job of acknowledging and recognizing, that there's a lot of knowledge that could be gleaned from these past personalities, these past players, that could be giving a helping hand to the current reign, to the current governance, to the current players that are being underutilized. But yeah, to your question, I think I was so proud, and I think now we've kind of let them down, you know, like pulling the funding a few months ahead of their World Cup. It's just it's shameful and unheard of, and I can't believe that we've put them in that position, because they're still going to be expected to get results. And this is a team that's just been desperate to have the same success at a World Cup that they've had, you know, in the 3 consecutive podiums at the Olympics. And now we're putting them in a difficult position where we're expecting them to achieve these high standards and get these results, but being underfunded and undercut and undermined. So anyway, the critics are still going to be there in droves. And I just hope now we're 2 months out of the World Cup that they get the support that they need, even though it might be too little too late.
And I want to ask you, because in the past couple of days, Charmaine Crooks became the new president of Canada Soccer. What do you make of that appointment? And also, you've alluded to it, but what needs to be changed at Canada Soccer, other than maybe just giving them more funding and not even just slashing it after winning all those medals and being so successful?
Yeah, well, I think I'll start there. Is I don't understand how you can throw, yes, it was the men's first World Cup in 36 years, and the men succeeding also means that everybody succeeds because of the disparity that exists at FIFA and in the world of football. If you have a successful men's team, it usually means that some of that can be funneled into, you know, the fiscal kind of the windfall that you'll get from that, and that can uphold your other programs. But now where we are in terms of the CBA, and then you have a federation that's championing that and saying that we're going to follow the lead of you know, our neighbors south of the border, even though that was a 6-year fight. And then they sued the federation for institutionalized gender discrimination, lost, but then eventually won the fight for equal pay. So we're hoping to do that in very short order. But in the meantime, while you're publicly talking about wanting to do that, and then it would be historic, and it would be, I'm not saying it wouldn't be, but how can you hold that up and trumpet that publicly, but then behind closed doors, but also publicly as well, because it's well known, you undercut your women's program, and that's okay to do, but you pull out all the stops for your men. And I'm not saying it would have been okay to cut the men's funding. That's not what I'm saying. But you can't do that to a historically successful women's program I mean, regardless of the results, but they have been the team that has pulled this federation along in terms of recognition, in terms of results, in terms of notoriety. And yet you have the balls to take the funding away mere months before their World Cup. So there's a lot that has to change. I think Charmaine, as the interim president and now the president for the remainder of Bontis's term, I think deserves a chance. I've been critical because I think in her term or her involvement, her experience at Canada Soccer as a board member and then as a vice president was complicit in a lot of dodgy decisions. And now as president, you think that there's going to be, a different mandate. I hope to be surprised. But now she has 12 months to prove otherwise. I think the fact that when, the She Believes Cup was happening and the team was protesting, and then they were forced back to work, and they wanted to strike and couldn't because then they were threatened to be sued individually by our federation. Yeah. And then Bontis resigns, and then in short order, Cochrane also resigned. I think that Charmaine staying silent and then the news that she hadn't reached out to our women's team, I think is problematic. So I think if you translate that to how Canada Soccer needs to operate, I think that's just a symptom of a greater issue, which is poor communication, poor PR. So the federation really has to kind of climb out of the dark ages and really come up to speed and to be really taken seriously and to move into the modern era of soccer. I think you have to catch up in that regard. So, there's been a changing of the guard, as it were. So now can you be more professional? They talked about hiring a sporting director. What's that going to look like? What is Jason DeVos going to do now as the interim general secretary? Will he be able to do a better job than Earl did in running sort of the day-to-day? I think from a budget standpoint, how do we reward our national teams equally, reckon with that disparity that exists in terms of the FIFA monies and the prize money and how all of that is going to be taken care of with those two. But then what about the youth programming? What about the para soccer? What about the beach soccer and the futsal? And how do we take care of that? I think with Project 8 coming, I think that you have Emma Humphreys and Cindy Tai really pleased about that because it's going to put a more robust support system and pipeline in place for our talent to be identified and to be supportive and to move up to support it and to be moved up through those ranks in a much more organized and sort of coherent manner than now. It just seems like it happens by accident that we get these players like Amanda Allen, who signs a pro contract with Orlando, and these other players who are being developed. We're outsourcing our talent, whether it's sending players over to Europe or to other professional leagues that exist in the world, or we're sending them to the NCAA to be developed by the coaches there for their style of play that they want for 3 months out of the year. Like, how do you hope to compete with a professional structure of a tier 2 or tier 3 team in France, for an example, where I just was last month with Quebec Soccer. So I've said a lot of things there. So I don't know how you attempt to fix the issue, but I think being more transparent, to use that old buzzword, finally see the nature of this CSB deal. I don't think the CSB deal is bad. I think that we need to make sure the CPL stays healthy. I think it needs to make sure that domestic pro league for men stays healthy and continues to develop the young players in this country, the young male players, but there has to be something for women. So Project 8 is going to start. We're going to learn lessons from other leagues that have started prior to Canada, because we're the only team in the top 20 that doesn't have a domestic pro league. So right away, Project 8 is going to be humming along because Diana and Tom are going to put something together that's going to make sense for the geography of our country, for the investment that's available, for the sponsors that are clamoring to jump on board to support women's sport. But it has to be sustainable. We have to put something in place that's going to exist in a decade, in 2 decades. And then can they work together? And can we do something so that the success of our national teams benefits them and benefits those youth programming without pulling away or those funds being diverted to the CPL? can they be supportive of one another without, cutting off your nose to spite your face?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if there's an answer, a short answer, Alex, but there's a lot of issues that I think we have to face head on if we want Canada to truly be a footballing nation, and for our grassroots to thrive, and for players to continue to be involved, especially young women and young girls who are still, I mean, the pandemic hit, and I mean, young girls who were already dropping out of sport at the age of puberty at 12 or 13. The rate, they were hit even harder by the pandemic. So how can we do right by them, by the next generation, but boys and girls, so that we're making sure we're keeping that talent, and we're funneling them into the sort of the upper echelons of our sport and what we can provide for them in our own backyard.
And I want to go off that because you put it so eloquently, and I don't think there's an easy solution to women's soccer in this country. As you said, like, Canada soccer has been so dysfunctional. You can't fix it overnight, but at least it seems as though these problems are now out there in the open, and that's at least a start. And with the women's league, I'm really optimistic. I really hope I think Ottawa has a team where I'm from, or they're probably going to have one, which would be great.
Yeah, I hope so.
I'd love to go out and support. And and I want to ask you a bit about the women's team itself. Obviously they have a tough group. I think all three nations are in the top 45-ish in the world. With everything you've mentioned with the strife between the women's team and the federation, what should the expectations be for this women's side after winning the gold medal at the Olympics in 2021?
Well, I think they continue to fight for respect, I think, worldwide, like despite those 3 consecutive podiums. I think if you look at the Ballon d'Or shortlist, you look at the Ballon d'Or nominees, the individual awards, Canada has not featured. Like, they gave Christine Sinclair a made-up award because they realized that they'd done her a disservice, in her prime, because now we have to recognize she's in the twilight of her career. She's still playing some fabulous football, but her best years are likely behind her. And I hope I'm wrong on that. She will likely prove me wrong, hopefully, in Australia. But they gave her an award that they basically hadn't given before, just to sort of give her some hardware, which is great. Ashley Lawrence continues to fly under the radar, which is a complete mystery to me. I think Jessie Fleming, while being recognized a little bit more, is again somebody else. And is it because they're Canadian? I don't know, but it could be, because of the reduced field. Some may argue it's an easier tournament to play through than the World Cup, and it is if you look at the timelines and the amount of games that you play. Less European teams, which Canada has had a tough time with in these international competitions. So maybe, a diluted pool, perhaps. Is that it? I don't really know. But I think despite the challenges that Canada has faced recently, we haven't even talked about the injuries that the team has. So, that adds on to already a really tenuous situation with our women's national team. Is that depth that they had all of a sudden on the attack, which those 2 Achilles injuries to Nichelle Prince and to Deanne Rose, like, they're going to be fighting against the clock to return. You have Kadisha Buchanan, who was recently at a boot and didn't participate in the Champions League for Chelsea, but she's back training. The other 2 that I mentioned, they're back training, but to get game fit, that's an issue. Adriana Leon, who was doing so well, was Canada's, I think, in my mind, their best scorer, their best striker in the last calendar year, makes that transfer from West Ham over to Manchester United and then doesn't play.
Yeah.
And then now is playing with the Thorns. But then Becky goes down with the ACL injury, so she's not available. And to me, that might be the biggest loss. I haven't even spoken about Desi Scott, who kind of shrouded in mystery, that knee injury, but she is somebody who is hugely important to this team, to sort of insulating that back line and locking down that midfield, and just being a constant presence there, and a ball winner and an outlet, but then, starting the attack and building out of that deep midfield. But back to Janine Beckie for a second. I think that Bev Priestman, I think sometimes when you're a player with as much versatility and athleticism as Janine has, that sometimes you're undervalued because, you know, when you're a striker, you're that number 9 or you're that Christine Sinclair. And obviously she's an outlier, but you're slotted in there immediately. But when you're a player, you can play wing back, you can play fullback, you can maybe play down the spine where she's been used sometimes as a number 10, or as an out and out winger. I think sometimes, you know, you're not seen as the key member of the squad. But for me, I think it wasn't lost on Bev Priestman, and she was the first name on that team sheet because it gave Bev that flexibility when it came to make a key substitution. Then she could make her substitution, and oftentimes, and usually it was not Janine, and then she could shift tactics, she could shift Janine around and plug her in where she needed her and know that she had a reliable person in that role wherever it was. So there's nobody else, I don't think, that can fill that role on the team right now. But you know, there's still some good youth that's coming up, and Jade Rose is one. So, you know, there's that center back battle with there's Buchanan and Gilles. So assuming that Buchanan is healthy, and then Shalina, who has also gone through her own struggles with COVID, and then with mono, I think she had, and like is recently just back playing with the Spurs and missed the last national team camp. So, I mean, those are already 3 great leaders and really pivotal players, playing sort of that defensive stalwart role in the 3 center backs. But Jade Rose has shown that she can come in there and not only do the job, but she can do a valiant job against the likes of Sam Kerr, one of the best strikers in the world, but can also play that fullback position. But Jade Revere being back and then made her debut for Manchester United, that is great news for her as a player to be back healthy, but that's great news for Canada because I think she's going to emerge, if not at this World Cup, I think in the next couple of years as one of the best players that Canada's ever produced.
Wow.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. But for just to go back, like, is a quarterfinals a successful tournament? What do you think the expectations or what would be a success for this team at the World Cup?
Yeah, well, I mean, prior to all of this happening, the funding being pulled and then say the Becky injury, assuming those other guys are healthy and coming back, the aforementioned names that I went through, I was thinking semifinals.
Wow.
And would it be a disappointment if they didn't get there? Likely not, but of course, making it through the group stages, making it out of the group. But I think they have the capacity and the talent to make it to the semifinals. And then would it be a disappointment if they didn't make it? Probably not. But I think it's the type of result or the type of tournament that they need in order to go back to my previous point, to get that respect. And that's not what their primary motivation is. But I think that goes a long way to sort of rectifying where this team belongs in terms of the world hierarchy of women's football. Like, they're ranked number 6 in the world, but you know, you look at that group, like, is Australia fearing Canada? I'm not entirely sure. That's going to be a really tough game after they go across the country to Perth and they have to come back over to the East Coast. Like, you know, it wasn't really talked about, but like to be in that group, and I think they do okay against Ireland. Nigeria is going to be a tricky game. We had that series, where I don't think Canada was very convincing last spring against them in Vancouver and Victoria. So that game, I think, is going to decide a lot. That final group game against a team that's going to have all the support in the world and lots of Aussie, oi, oi, oi's coming from the stands, right? But if they get through that game, I think it only gives them confidence. And then it also buys you a little bit of time. Because, you know, if you're working against a clock for injuries, you're not going to get more game fit, you know, game 1 versus the first game of the knockout stages. But for a player that might need just an extra week or maybe an extra 10 days, then, you know, maybe you can get like 30 minutes out of a sub that maybe you didn't have at your disposal beforehand if you're Bev Priestman. But I think this team desperately needs that, not only for like their morale, for everything that they've gone through, but, you know, is this Christine Sinclair's swan song? I don't know. Does she stick around for Paris in 2024? I'm not sure. So again, I hope she defies the odds and defies me saying that she's in the twilight of her career, but hopefully they can put it together, if not for them and kind of where they deserve to be, I think, in terms of a perception of this team in the world, but also for their captain.
Yeah, and I want to, before I let you go, I want to ask you just that Canada, it seems as though finally soccer really feels as though with the men and women's team is coming to the forefront of people's minds. And we've mentioned numerous times about the Olympics. You mentioned the men's going to the World Cup. What effects will these have for the next generation of Canadian soccer players and just people in Canada for the game in this country? What do you think the making the World Cup in the men's and winning the Olympics and all those medals in previous years will do for the game in this country?
I think they can really be galvanizing moments for this next generation. You know, that you get those recognizable faces. You get the visibility that I think the sport needs, but you get also the representation that you need for Canada, which is a cultural mosaic, and we're proud of it. But you can champion it, and you can actually see it, and then you can be it, you know, which is something so important for young girls, but also for young boys to look at a Tajon Buchanan, to look at an Alfonso Davies, a Milan Borjan, a Tiba Hutchinson, but also to look at an Alistair Johnston and the trajectory that his career has taken, and you know, his time spent at CF Montreal, and now he's basically on every team of the week in the Scottish Premier League for Celtic, right? So you have that, but then you also have the kind of reverberations felt from the excitement of being at that World Cup, maybe not getting the results that you hope to get, but seeing your team, seeing that representation, seeing it on the biggest stage. And then for our women as well, you know, you get to see maybe not quite the same diversity, because I think in women's sport, I think, say for an example, just to back up a little bit from my original point, the Quebec Rex now is called the PEF, is still pay to play for young girls.
Yeah.
And that's something that I hope to have a hand in changing eventually. Because the boys, there's no girls' academy at CF Montreal, but hopefully soon we'll have a girls' academy. The boys' academy certainly is not pay to play.
Yeah.
And so, you know, soccer has long since been seen as a sport that's highly accessible, say compared to hockey, because your price point for entry is significantly lower, because you just need a pair of runners and your shin pads and you're good to go. But as you move up through the ranks, we're seeing now that you're leaving the poorer kids behind. If you don't have the means, if your parents don't have the socioeconomic standing to pay a couple grand a year, well, then we lose those kids. And then I think you're seeing on the women's side, you're seeing kind of a narrowing in terms of the diversity because of that. So I think hopefully in a generation's time, you're going to see teams that are truly representative of our Canadian population. But you can see now in your Kadisha Buchanans and in Quinn as a first transgender athlete to win a medal, and everything that they stand for and all the work that they're doing in the community. It's very, very meaningful to see yourself, to see somebody who looks like you achieve big things. And so I think Canada is at a little bit of a tipping point now. I don't think that we're truly a footballing nation yet. I think that our federation needs to get things in order. Certainly our national sports organization are at a time of reckoning, and we need to make sure that we create safe environment for everybody to practice and to play sport. And I think our communities need to continue to champion that, and to make sure that it's an inclusive environment, it's a diverse environment, and it's an enjoyable and safe place for everybody to be. And then, you know, if you have that tip of the pyramid where you have people that look like you, that are saying the right things and are great role models, then you create that link. And then I think you will see in a couple of generation, or this generation now that are young, that remember the Fonzie's goal. You remember Julia Grosso scoring that penalty at the Olympics to win the gold medal. That will be for them maybe a moment that they reference when they're on your podcast.
Yeah. Well,
and they say that's something that spurred me along and made me kind of that set me on this path. So I think we're doing a lot of the right things on the playing field. I think now that Canada needs to make sure they're evening the playing field, to maybe not sound so hokey, to make sure that it's accessible to all and equal opportunity is afforded to all, but that you're creating a really professional governance system in our national sporting organizations that are supporting then the elite play on the field, that off the field, we can be proud of that as well.
Thank you so much, Amy, for coming on. I really appreciate that. And I think if you're the head or as part of Canadian soccer, we're pretty lucky to have you. And thank you so much for taking the time. And I really hope that and I really believe that soccer in Canada is getting better. It'll be tough, but we have to keep pushing through and make it better and more accessible for all and fair to whoever you are, not just based on money or anything else like that. So thank you so much for taking the time and coming on, Amy.
Thank you, Alex. It was great. Thanks for the chat.